The privilege ends now, my husband announced, deciding that from now on we would keep separate budgets. I agreed, knowing full well he'd soon regret it on Sunday. As always, my in-laws came for lunch. But when my mother-in-law stepped into the kitchen, she shrieked so loudly that even the neighbors bolted from their homes. My blood ran cold that Friday night, chilling me to the bone. Imagine spending hours pouring your heart into a meal for your in-laws, only for your husband to casually declare, with sickening, calculated calm, that your comfortable life at his expense was officially over. Can you even fathom that kind of audacity? What happened next wasn't what he expected, it was a reckoning. He said it in our living room, the one we bought largely with the inheritance Grandma Teresa left me. I remember his tone so vividly, cold, detached, like he was signing a business contract, not utterly shattering the foundation of our marriage. Some humiliations don't hit you like a slap, they seep in like a silent poison, slowly paralyzing you until you barely notice. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home, like everything you do, every effort, just disappears? It's a devastating feeling, isn't it? And you get used to it, little by little, until one day, something just snaps. Believe me, you don't want to miss what happens when a woman finally gets tired of being taken for granted and decides to start charging for what she does. Because I did. It all really came to a head right after his parents, Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett, finally left. Every other Friday, like clockwork, they'd visit their son, which really meant I'd spend at least 6 hours cooking, cleaning, arranging flowers, making sure every single corner of our house was spotless. All of it, just so Veronica could perform her ritualistic inspection and deliver one of her signature passive-aggressive jabs about my little graphic design hobby. She'd always say something like, "Oh, it's just so nice you have something to keep you busy, Marianne," as if my actual, paying job wasn't real work. That night, dinner conversation, as always, revolved around Leonard's accomplishments, eventually landing on how we managed to buy such a beautiful house outside New York City. Leonard, chest puffed out with pride, launched into his usual spiel about his hard work, his vision, his wise investments, conveniently forgetting to mention that the vast majority of our down payment came directly from my grandmother's inheritance. The second the door clicked shut behind them, Leonard turned to me. That arrogant, condescending smile I'd always hated spread across his face. "Sweetheart," he purred, "starting with the next payment, we're going to have separate budgets. Your comfortable life at my expense is over." He delivered it with such calm confidence, like a king granting a decree, utterly convinced I'd crumble, beg, or burst into tears. But all I felt was a sudden, icy chill. The sheer injustice of his words hit me, not like a surprise, but like a brutal confirmation of a truth that had always been there, just below the surface, now finally laid bare. Because I was the one burning the midnight oil, working until 2 a.m. on my tablet, designing logos, editing videos, churning out freelance projects for my clients. I managed all the household accounts, did the shopping, paid the bills, meticulously decorated every single room with my taste and, yes, my money. Every single Sunday, I prepared a feast for his parents, appetizers, main course, dessert, only to be met with Veronica's icy critiques about the sauce being off or the meat being a bit dry. To them, all of it was completely invisible. My endless labor, my emotional energy, my financial contribution, even if it wasn't a steady paycheck, it was significant, it was all just expected. My duty as a wife. My inheritance? Pure luck, something to be forgotten. In that searing moment, it all clicked. He didn't see me as his partner. Not at all. He saw me as a luxury employee, someone he was generously supporting. I remember the very first time that feeling of invisibility truly settled in. It was our first Sunday lunch in this house. I'd spent 2 full days lovingly preparing Grandma Teresa's roasted pork recipe. I was so excited, so proud, so desperate to please. Veronica took one bite and, with a dismissive flick of her wrist, declared, "It's a bit dry. Next time, let me supervise you so it turns out better." And Leonard? Leonard said nothing. He just lowered his head, kept eating, and gave his mother a faint, approving smile. That day, I knew. Every Sunday would be a test, and I was always destined to fail. My kitchen, which was supposed to be my creative haven, my refuge, had become a courtroom. I was always the accused, never allowed a defense. Even the beautiful quartz countertop, which I had chosen and paid for myself, seemed to mock me, a silent, gleaming witness to my ignored efforts and the slow, toxic buildup of resentment. So, when Leonard threw that phrase at me that Friday, I could see it in his eyes. He was practically salivating for a scene. His rigid posture, the way his jaw clenched, everything screamed he was ready for the usual confrontation. He wanted my tears. He craved my anger. The same old fight that always ended with him playing the magnanimous husband, the powerful one setting boundaries. I could almost hear the pre-written speech in his head about financial responsibility and what's best for us. He desperately wanted to reaffirm himself as the provider, the head of the household, a role his parents had relentlessly drilled into him. But that night, the woman he thought he knew, the one who quietly absorbed criticism and tried so hard to please everyone, was gone. Something profound, something irreversible, snapped inside me. It wasn't a planned decision, it was a spark igniting deep within my mind. All the years of pain, all the silent humiliations, condensed into a single, sharp, incandescent idea. The frantic voices in my head, the endless self-justifications, they all went silent. All that remained was an absolute, powerful, almost terrifying stillness. A silence pregnant with possibility. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't see the man I'd once fallen in love with. I saw a stranger, meticulously acting out a part his mother had written for him. And in that profound silence, I found my answer. To his utter, complete surprise, I smiled. It wasn't forced. It wasn't sarcastic. It was real. Calm. Almost a relief. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and said softly, "Excellent idea, darling. It's about time we had some financial clarity." His reaction was priceless, almost comical. He just stared, mouth half open, blinking, utterly bewildered. Was I serious? Was I mocking him? He couldn't tell. I kept my tone steady, confident. There would be no war tonight. No tears. Instead, I offered him my most potent weapon, my composure. I calmly picked up my tablet from the coffee table, the very same toy where I spent hours working for clients, and turned it on. The soft glow of the screen illuminated my face. "Let's start," I said. "How about we make a list of shared and individual expenses? That way, everything will be perfectly ready for the next payment cycle. I want this to be fair for both of us." His confusion morphed into something close to fear. He wasn't prepared for this. Not for my airy calmness. Not for my chilling efficiency. He wanted drama. I gave him a business meeting. And in that instant, without him even realizing it, the power shifted. That night, while Leonard slept soundly beside me, I couldn't close my eyes. My tablet lay open on my lap, but I wasn't working for a client. No. I was working on something far more critical, my escape plan. I meticulously listed every single household task I performed. Meal planning. Grocery shopping. Cleaning. Budgeting. Coordinating maintenance. Every single invisible job that kept our lives, and his comfortable life, running smoothly. Next to each task, I looked up the going rate for those services in New York City: a personal chef, a professional housekeeper, a household manager, an event planner. The numbers started adding up, one by one, until they formed a total that was utterly staggering. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, exactly what I was going to do. My plan for Sunday lunch began to crystallize, a plan both exquisitely beautiful and utterly terrifying. Saturday morning, the house felt different. The air was still, thick with a strange, quiet tension. There were no clattering pots, no enticing smell of spices, no frantic rush of me trying to make everything perfect. Leonard came downstairs, I'm sure expecting to find me in the kitchen, maybe regretful, maybe worried. Instead, he found me sitting on the patio sofa, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, my tablet calmly on my lap. He just stared, silently, waiting for me to speak first. I looked up, a small, calm smile playing on my lips. "Good morning, darling," I said, my voice light. "I slept wonderfully." His face was absolutely priceless. He had no idea what was happening. Peace had become my new, impenetrable weapon, and he had absolutely no defense against it. He didn't grasp that the woman he'd humiliated the night before no longer existed. In her place sat a strategist, a woman who'd spent the entire night calculating the precise price of her freedom. All day, he tried to bait me. He'd throw out little comments about how nice it must be to enjoy my day off, as if he didn't know my weeks were a blur of endless work and sleepless nights. Later, while I was focused on a design, he walked behind me and said mockingly, "Good thing you have time for your little drawings." Each word he uttered wasn't a jab, it was another chasm opening between us. In the past, those phrases would have cut deep, made me feel guilty or lazy. But now? Every comment was just another line item on the mental invoice I was meticulously drafting. I listened without reacting, nodding with a calm serenity that I knew was driving him absolutely insane. And in my mind, I added an extra charge for emotional damage. He didn't realize he was no longer talking to his wife. He was talking to a service provider, one who was about to hand him her bill. His arrogance was the very fuel feeding my new, unshakable determination. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store, but this was no ordinary weekend shopping trip. There would be no expensive pork ribs for his father, no fancy wine his mother adored, no endless ingredients for those suffocating family feasts. This time, I walked the aisles with a completely different purpose. I bought Greek yogurt, just for me. A perfect salmon fillet. Avocados. Blueberries. The specialty coffee I loved. Every item I dropped into that cart was a silent, defiant declaration of independence. At checkout, I paid with my own card and felt a small, but incredibly powerful, surge of satisfaction. It was the first time in so long I had bought food purely for myself, for my taste, my health, my needs. It felt like the very first step toward reclaiming my space, not just in this house, but in my own life. When I got back and started putting away my groceries, I paused, gazing at the kitchen. This dream kitchen, with its gleaming white quartz island and state-of-the-art stainless steel appliances, had been my pride and joy. I'd designed every inch of it myself, chosen every detail, from the cabinet handles to the lighting. And, most importantly, I had paid for it with a huge chunk of the money Grandma Teresa had left me. I remembered her words, clear as day, from the day she handed me the inheritance papers. "It's for you to build your independence, sweetheart, not anyone else's." And certainly not out of guilt. A knot of guilt tightened in my chest. I had betrayed her. I had allowed my hard-earned investment to become the very stage for my own servitude. But that guilt quickly hardened into a decision, as firm and unyielding as steel. I would honor her memory. And this kitchen, my kitchen, would become the place where my independence was reborn. As the sun began to dip behind the New York City buildings, doubt tried to creep in. I sat on the porch, wondering if I was being too drastic. Maybe I should just talk to him, try one more time to make him understand. But then, like a phantom, the memory of last Christmas resurfaced. I had spent 3 days cooking for 20 of his relatives. I was utterly exhausted but felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Until I overheard Veronica whisper to her sister, "Poor Leonard. He works so hard while Marianne just plays house." No one defended me. Leonard, standing right beside her, just smiled. That memory. That one single memory. It incinerated any last shred of hesitation. No. I wasn't being drastic. I was being fair. For the very first time, I was putting myself first. Saturday dinner was a surreal scene. I ordered a gourmet salad from a nearby restaurant, just for myself. Leonard watched me, clearly expecting me to offer him some, but I didn't. Not a crumb. He eventually got up, quietly, and made himself a sad ham and cheese sandwich with what looked like the oldest bread in the pantry. We ate in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the clink of silverware. He was waiting for me to break, to find the quiet unbearable, to cry, or to yell. But I savored every single bite of my salad, tasting not just the fresh greens, but the potent flavor of my own self-assertion. He had asked for separate budgets and clear rules, and I was giving them to him, to the letter. What he couldn't comprehend was that his desperate attempt to control me had, in fact, set me completely free. The cage he had meticulously built for me had sprung open, and I was finally learning to fly again, right here, within the walls of my own home. Sunday morning dawned with an almost eerie peace. I woke early, as always, but instead of rushing to the kitchen to marinate meat or prepare dessert, I calmly made myself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the patio to read. The city sunlight began to warm the air, and the house was utterly silent. No clanging pots. No aroma of frying garlic. Just birdsong and the soft whisper of the breeze. For the first time in years, a Sunday morning didn't feel like the start of another exhausting, unpaid workday. It felt like what it was supposed to be. A day of rest. A deep, profound peace settled over me, the kind that only comes when you know you're about to reclaim what's rightfully yours. Leonard finally shuffled downstairs around 9. His eyes immediately scanned the spotless, empty kitchen, and a distinct line of worry creased his forehead. "Don't tell me you're not cooking," he demanded, his voice thin, almost childish, like a spoiled kid whose birthday party was about to be cancelled. "My parents are coming at 1. I looked at him over the top of my book, my voice as natural as if we were discussing the weather. "No, sweetheart. Sunday lunches were part of my household management services. And since we now have separate budgets, that service, of course, comes with a fee. If you'd like to hire me, we can absolutely discuss the rates." His expression morphed from confusion to disbelief, then to a barely contained, simmering anger. I could practically hear the desperate gears grinding in his head, frantically trying to find a way to regain control. But I wasn't playing his game anymore. A few minutes later, his phone rang. Of course, it was Veronica. I could hear him from the living room, speaking in a low, tense, almost pleading whisper. "Yes, Mom. Everything's fine." "Yes, of course. Something simpler today. A surprise." The falseness in his tone, the raw panic hidden beneath it, was almost comical. The man who always prided himself on being in control, the great provider, the head of the family, was utterly trapped in his own web. He hung up, his eyes burning with a fury I had genuinely never seen directed at me before. "Fix this, Marianne," he ordered, his voice no longer arrogant, but desperate. I simply shook my head. "I'm sorry, Leonard. You set the rules." With a calmness that even surprised me, I picked up my tablet, the very same one he always dismissed as my little drawing toy. I opened the spreadsheet app, where I'd meticulously drafted my plan Friday night, and created a new document. Clean. Professional. Just like the ones I'd present to my best clients. At the top, in a crisp, clear font, I wrote, "Invoice for cooking and household management services." Then, I began breaking down the costs, menu planning, purchasing quality ingredients, preparation and cooking, 6 hours of labor at the rate of a private chef, table service, and post-meal cleanup. Each line item carried a value, calculated based on real market prices in New York City. The total was beautiful. Neat. Perfectly round. And absolutely, unequivocally fair. My work tool had finally become the instrument of my own justice. When the clock hand finally swept past 1, I moved to the refrigerator. I pulled out the salmon, the avocados, the fresh vegetables I'd bought just for myself. With steady, deliberate movements, I began preparing my own lunch. Then, I grabbed a roll of labels and a marker. I opened the Greek yogurt and, with a flourish, wrote "Property of Marianne." I did the same with my coffee. My fruit. My bottle of wine. It was a small, yet profoundly powerful image. The tangible symbol of my independence. I wasn't just drawing a line in the fridge, I was drawing a line in our lives. He wanted separation? Oh, I was giving it to him. In the most literal way possible. I could hear his restless footsteps pacing through the living room, the frantic rhythm ticking down to the inevitable moment. The doorbell was about to ring, and I was ready. The show was about to begin. At precisely 1 o'clock, the bell sliced through the silence of the house like a knife. Each vibration sent a jolt down my spine, not of fear, but of a strange, thrilling anticipation. It was the signal. The moment I had been meticulously preparing for. I watched Leonard leap from the sofa as if he'd been jolted by electricity. His face was pale, slick with sweat, a map of sheer panic. He stumbled to the door, trying to smooth his shirt, forcing a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was about to play his usual, tired role, the perfect husband, the doting son, the confident host, the architect of a happy family illusion, the man of the house. He didn't realize that the very foundations of his carefully constructed castle were about to utterly collapse. From my quiet vantage point on the patio, my coffee still warm in my hand, I felt like I was watching a play. I was the director, and he was the tragic protagonist, utterly oblivious that he was about to face the final act. The moment he opened the door, his transformation was instant. His voice turned loud, artificially cheerful, that rehearsed tone I knew so agonizingly well. "Mom! Dad! Welcome! Come in, please." Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennet swept in with the entitled confidence of people who felt they owned the place. Veronica, impeccable in a flawless white linen suit that probably cost more than my last design invoice, scanned the room. When she didn't immediately see me, she lifted her chin in disdain. "How strange," she announced, her voice piercing the air. "It doesn't smell like anything today. Usually, you can smell the roast pork from the entrance." Mr. Bennet, as always, remained silent, but his eyes swept the living room, taking in the unnatural stillness, the absence of the usual chaotic bustle that always heralded their arrival. The first stone had been thrown. And I hadn't even moved. Leonard, visibly sweating, tried desperately to distract them. "Today, I wanted to give you a surprise. Something different. Why don't you sit in the living room? Can I get you something to drink? A glass of wine? Maybe whiskey?" His attempt to play the perfect host was pathetic. He never served the drinks, that had always been my job. Veronica ignored him completely, setting her expensive designer purse down on the sofa I had chosen and paid for. Her goal was clear, she wouldn't be sidetracked by a drink. "First," she declared, "I'll just pop into the kitchen to see if Marianne needs help. She's probably overwhelmed by the surprise she prepared." The word surprise dripped with venomous sarcasm. To her, I was utterly incapable of doing anything right without her supervision, and she couldn't wait to find a mistake, any excuse, to reassert her supposed superiority. With the unshakable determination of a general inspecting her troops, she marched toward the kitchen. Leonard tried to stop her, placing a hand on her arm. "Mom, really, there's no need. I'll take care of it," he pleaded, almost whimper-like. She brushed him off impatiently, like swatting away a bothersome child. "Don't be ridiculous, Leonard. I know your wife. She probably needs help." And without another word, she swept past him, heading straight for the hallway. From my seat on the patio, through the glass door, I had a perfect, cinematic view of the unfolding scene. I saw Leonard's stiff back, his shoulders slumped in helpless defeat. And I felt no pity. What I felt was a strange, almost pleasant calm. This was poetic justice. He had unleashed the storm with his arrogance, and now, he would have to face the hurricane he himself had summoned, his own mother. The serenity that filled me was so deep, it felt almost supernatural. The peace of knowing that, for the very first time, the script was entirely in my hands. It was in that brief, suspended moment of silence before the storm truly broke that I heard the sentence that utterly sealed my decision. Mr. Bennet, who had lingered near the door, approached his son and asked quietly, "Everything okay, son? You look nervous." Leonard's reply was a venomous whisper, dripping with contempt. But I caught every single word. "It's nothing, Dad. She's just being dramatic again. I had to put her in her place about the money. She'll get over it once she realizes she can't live without my credit card." Every word was another nail. A cold, hard nail in the coffin of our marriage. This wasn't an argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was how he truly saw me. A burden. A parasite. A woman who, in his twisted mind, couldn't possibly survive without him. At that moment, my plan stopped being a mere lesson. It became a sentence. Veronica finally stepped into the kitchen. The silence that followed was deafening, speaking volumes more than any words ever could. I could visualize the scene without even moving, her eyes scanning the immaculate white quartz counters, the gleaming, dry sink, the cold, unused stove, the perfectly closed cabinets. Everything was pristine, like a photograph from a magazine, but utterly, unnervingly lifeless. She had expected the rich scent of spices, the comforting warmth of the oven, the gentle bubbling of pots. Instead, she found sterile silence. The stark emptiness of a broken routine. I could almost feel her confusion, her mind frantically trying to grasp a logical explanation. Perhaps the food was in the patio oven? Or perhaps everything was ready, and I was just waiting to serve? But that unnatural stillness, that lack of anything, had to be eating away at her reason. Then came the scream. It wasn't just a startled shriek. It was a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated fury, a sound that ripped through the air and vibrated through the very walls of the house. It was the cry of a queen defied, a matriarch who had not received her expected tribute. I heard the frantic footsteps of Leonard and Mr. Bennet rushing towards the kitchen. They burst in to find Veronica standing frozen in the middle of the tiled floor I had chosen, her face crimson, one trembling finger pointed accusingly at the refrigerator. Her expression was a terrifying mix of rage and disbelief, as if she had discovered an act of treason, not just an empty kitchen. The show had reached its explosive first climax. Leonard's face was a study in rapid transformation. Confusion gave way to blinding panic, then to a cold, contained fury as his eyes finally locked onto mine. I stood calmly in the doorway leading to the patio, watching everything with a composure that must have seemed inhuman to him. In my hands, my tablet, my work tool, that little drawing toy he used to mock, glowed softly, casting a bluish light on my face. The tension in the room was so thick, you could practically carve it with a knife. Mr. Bennet's gaze darted between his wife, me, and his son, desperately trying to make sense of the chaos. But Veronica needed no explanations. To her, the culprit stood directly before her eyes. Her small, dark pupils locked onto mine, burning with a fury that promised outright war. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was about to face the wrath of a woman who had never, not once, heard the word no, before Leonard could even stammer out an excuse, or his father could intervene. Veronica sucked in a furious breath and spoke in a tone that sliced through the air like a whip. "Would you care to explain what this means, Marianne?" she spat, each word dripping with venomous disdain. "Is this supposed to be some kind of joke? It's 1:15. Where's the lunch you were supposed to make?" The brutal emphasis on supposed to said it all. To her, I wasn't family. I was staff. Her cook. Her hostess. Her guaranteed source of comfort. She didn't ask if I was okay, if something had happened. She simply demanded her meal, her routine, her absolute right to be served in my house. She was so utterly certain of her power over me that it never even crossed her mind that I might have a reason. Without saying a single word, I stepped forward, the silence growing heavier around me. I lifted my tablet, turning the screen slowly towards them. The document I had meticulously prepared on Friday night glowed with professional precision. At the top, in an elegant font I had designed myself, the title read, "Invoice for Sunday Lunch Services." I let the image speak for itself. I saw a flicker of confusion cross Mr. Bennet's face. Veronica's fiery anger dissolved into bewildered shock. And pure, unadulterated terror flashed in Leonard's eyes. He, and only he, understood immediately what he was seeing. He had asked for financial clarity, and I was delivering it to him on a silver platter. With a calm so cold it seemed to chill the very air, I raised the tablet higher, allowing the bluish light of the screen to wash over their stunned faces. The silence in the kitchen pressed against my ears. Mr. Bennet blinked repeatedly, as if trying to focus on a reality that simply defied comprehension. Veronica, meanwhile, had gone from raging fury to an absolute, blank confusion that seemed to erase every thought from her mind. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. But it was Leonard's face that remained seared into my memory like a photograph. His skin was waxy, pale, his features tight and drained of all color. His eyes, fixed on the screen, held no anger, no wounded pride. Only raw, naked fear. The chilling fear of a man watching the carefully constructed house of cards of his entire control collapse with one simple, undeniable breath of truth. Veronica was, predictably, the first to finally shatter the silence. She let out a laugh, sharp and hollow, a sound that wasn't sincere or amused, but the nervous, desperate reflex of someone scrambling to regain control of a situation that was rapidly slipping away. "Oh, please, Marianne. What a silly joke," she said, feigning calm. "Come on now, stop the theatrics. Turn that thing off and tell us what you prepared for lunch. You must be hiding it somewhere to surprise us." She took a step toward me, a forced, condescending smile plastered on her face, the kind she always used when she wanted to remind everyone who she thought was in charge. She lifted her hand, intending to pat my arm, a maternal, almost patronizing gesture. But I didn't move. Her hand met only empty air. Her smile vanished instantly. My eyes never left hers. "It's not a joke, Veronica," I said slowly, my voice sounding strangely foreign, almost robotic. It was the voice of an executive in a boardroom, not a wife in her own kitchen. "It's a business proposal." I spoke with the chilling precision of someone delivering a critical report. As Leonard himself proposed on Friday, we've implemented a complete separation of budgets. And since family event catering was not part of our original agreement, it is now billed separately. The standard rate is $350, and it includes menu planning, the purchase of high-quality ingredients, 6 hours of labor at a private chef's rate in New York City, table service, and post-meal cleanup. Every word was cold, calculated, stripped bare of any emotion. I was speaking their language: money, numbers, transactions. The only language they truly respected. That's when Leonard finally snapped. Not with words, but with a violent, lunging movement. He took a long stride toward me, trying to snatch the tablet from my hands, as if destroying it could somehow erase the stark reality displayed on its screen. "That's enough, Marianne. Give me that," he growled, his voice low, thick with a desperate, restrained rage. "What do you think you're doing? You're embarrassing us in front of my parents." His fury was utterly predictable. I had anticipated it. I calmly stepped back, keeping the tablet well out of his reach. I looked him straight in the eye, without a single trace of fear. The woman who used to shrink at his shouting was gone. In her place stood an unshakable stillness, a calm, cold resolve that unsettled him far more than the invoice itself. "Ridiculous?" I said softly, but each word cut like glass. "Let me explain what's truly ridiculous, Leonard. Ridiculous was you standing in this very room telling me my comfortable life at your expense was over. Ridiculous is that you said it while standing on a floor I paid for, in a kitchen where every single appliance was bought with my money, inside a house whose down payment, 80% of it, came directly from my grandmother's inheritance." Each word landed like a hammer blow. The impact was immediate, palpable. Mr. Bennet took a step back, looking at his son with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The carefully constructed story they had maintained for years, that of the successful model son graciously supporting his artist wife, crumbled to dust. Mentioning the inheritance was breaking a sacred taboo. Everyone knew it existed, but no one, absolutely no one, dared speak of it aloud. Veronica looked at me, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated hatred. I was no longer just the insolent daughter-in-law. I was now a direct threat to her pride, to her carefully curated family reputation. "You ungrateful woman," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you. We gave you a name, a place, a family." She hurled her old weapons at me, guilt, shame, the crushing weight of the status she believed she had bestowed upon me. But those bullets, every single one, bounced harmlessly off the newly forged armor of truth and self-respect. Without another word, I turned around slowly, deliberately, almost theatrically. I walked to the refrigerator, the very one filled with my neatly labeled items. I pulled open the door, and the light within illuminated a small, silent army of tags, each bearing my name. It was a simple, yet profoundly powerful image. The tangible symbol of my independence. I reached in and took out a bottle of sparkling water, one of the expensive ones Leonard used to call a useless luxury. When I opened it, the crisp hiss of carbonation sounded loud and defiantly in the hushed kitchen. I took a long, slow sip, my eyes fixed firmly on them. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The message was as clear as the glass of water I was drinking: this is my space. These are my things. And I decide what happens here. My silence was my declaration of war. The utter calm on my face seemed to break something inside Leonard. His expression twisted into a sickening mix of fury and raw humiliation. He had lost control. Of the scene. Of his audience. Of me. Desperate to reclaim some semblance of authority, he resorted to his last, pathetic weapon, a threat. "This ends now, Marianne," he hissed, his voice trembling, barely holding back a roar. "You're going to turn off that damn tablet, apologize to my parents for this circus, and start cooking something, or I swear you'll pack your things and get out of my house right now." The word might echoed hollowly, a desperate, pathetic attempt to assert an authority he no longer possessed. I turned slowly to face him, still holding the cold bottle in my hand, my resolve just as icy. A small, steady smile, not mocking, just utterly sure, appeared on my lips. I looked straight into his eyes, those eyes I had once loved, but that now reflected only the raw fear of a stranger. I let the silence stretch, hanging heavy in the air, before I shattered his threat with surgical calm. "Allow me to correct you, Leonard," I said, my voice low and precise. "It's not your house. It's mostly mine. My inheritance money is legally recorded in the purchase." I dropped that truth into the kitchen like a bomb. The silence that followed was explosive. I saw realization dawn, slow and painful, on Veronica's and Mr. Bennet's faces. They finally understood. They weren't looking at a rebellious wife. They were standing in front of the rightful owner of the very house they were in. Leonard was speechless. His threat collapsed, crumbling uselessly at his feet. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had flipped. Completely. I finished my water in one steady sip, then added, just as calmly, "The offer still stands, for $100 for the lunch service. Or, if you prefer, we can start negotiating a rental agreement. I can draft it right now." I paused, then added with a restrained, icy irony, that, of course, is also a billable service. My words hung heavy in the air, then slowly settled, each one a solid, undeniable weight. The shock seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was dense, charged with the brutal reality we were all suddenly facing. Veronica stared at me, eyes wide, her face shifting from disbelief to a rage so profound it seemed unable to escape her throat. Mr. Bennet stood motionless, his gaze fixed on me, no longer disapproving, but coldly calculating, as if reassessing a failed investment. And Leonard. Leonard was pale, almost translucent, as though my revelation hadn't just shattered his argument, but had drained the very life from him. He stood there in the middle of my kitchen like a ghost, utterly lost in the wreckage of his own self-made disaster. Veronica was, predictably, the first to explode, though her anger no longer carried the potent force it once had. It sounded like a storm that had lost its center, flailing. "You manipulative liar," she spat, though her voice lacked its usual commanding sting. "How dare you talk to us about money, about contracts? This is my son's house," she added, glancing around, as if the physical space itself could reassert her crumbling power. "You've poisoned his mind," she raged on, desperately clinging to her old script, the one where she was the queen and I, the ungrateful servant. But now her words rang hollow, desperate, like blanks fired against a concrete wall. The power she had wielded for years, built on guilt, duty, and shame, had evaporated. The moment I confronted her fantasies with the hard, undeniable facts of financial reality, her power was gone. I ignored her. She was no longer my focus. I turned my gaze to her husband, the quiet, formidable foundation of all that authority. I looked him straight in the eyes, a deep, unwavering calm rising from within me. "Mr. Bennett," I said, my voice even, professional. "You're a businessman. You understand assets, liabilities, returns, and investments. My grandmother left me an inheritance, and with that money, I paid for 80% of the down payment on this property. Leonard contributed the remaining 20%, and his salary covers part of the mortgage, while my income as a designer pays for maintenance and all household expenses." I paused, my voice never wavering from its professional tone. "Tell me, as a man of numbers, do you truly think it's fair that the majority shareholder of this asset be treated as an unpaid employee?" I was speaking his language. The language of tangible value. Of numbers that left no room for debate. Mr. Bennett didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted from me to his son, and for an instant, I saw a flicker of profound disappointment cross his face. Then he turned toward his wife, whose expression was tight, distorted by sheer frustration. Finally, he looked back at me. His eyes no longer held disdain, but something new. A cool assessment. Almost a quiet respect. He didn't say a word, but his silence was the clearest, most devastating response. In the court of logic and facts, the case was closed. This wasn't a victory for me. It was a sentence for Leonard. His father, with that single, damning silence, had just confirmed everything I'd said. And that destroyed him. I watched him deflate like the air leaving a balloon. The arrogance, the fury, the pride, all of it vanished, leaving behind only a hollow sadness. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, avoiding my gaze, and his parents. "That's enough, Marianne," he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "You won. That's what you wanted, isn't it? You won. You ruined Sunday. You ruined everything." It wasn't an apology. It was the whiny accusation of a child blaming someone else for breaking a toy he had already smashed himself. He blamed me for revealing the truth, not realizing that he was the one who had meticulously built the lie. To Leonard, my act of independence wasn't liberation, it was an act of pure destruction. I slowly shook my head, a shadow of genuine sadness passing through me. "I didn't ruin anything, Leonard," I said quietly. "I just held up a mirror. What you saw in it was already broken long ago. The only difference is that today, I decided to stop pretending I didn't see the cracks." I walked calmly to the kitchen island and gently set my tablet down on the quartz counter, the very spot where my entire plan had begun. My work tool, the one he used to belittle as my little drawing toy, now rested motionless, its purpose gloriously fulfilled. The invoice still glowed on its screen, a digital epitaph for our marriage, precisely as it had been until this day. I took my phone from my pocket. "And since we're all so intent on treating everything as business," I said, my gaze sweeping across Veronica's stunned face, "allow me one last professional gesture." I dialed a number I knew by heart. A voice answered immediately. Good afternoon. How can I help you? Good afternoon, I replied, my tone polite, almost cheerfully detached. I'd like to confirm a reservation for 3 people under the name Veronica Bennett. Yes, that's right. For lunch. Could it be on the terrace? Perfect. Thank you very much. I hung up, looking at them. Their faces were a canvas of utter confusion. I've reserved a table for you at one of the most exclusive restaurants on the Upper East Side, I said evenly. It's a gift from me. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience and for the catering service not provided today. It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was an act of pure, unadulterated power. An elegant dismissal. I was offering them luxury, the very same luxury they had always used to underscore their superiority. But this time, it came from me. Not as a plea, but as an undeniable statement of hierarchy. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator. Veronica's mouth opened, but no sound escaped. Mr. Bennett watched me with a complicated expression, part surprise, part faint amusement, as if recognizing a masterstroke. Leonard, meanwhile, sank even further into his defeat. I hadn't beaten him with shouting or tears, but with precision, with a calculated courtesy that left him utterly unarmed, with no way out. He had lost on his own battlefield, power and status. We're not going anywhere. Veronica stammered finally, looking frantically to her husband for backup. Charles, for heaven's sake, say something. Do something. But for the first time in all the years I'd known them, Mr. Bennett didn't side with her. He shook his head slowly, with a finality that left absolutely no doubt. Let's go, Veronica, he said, his voice calm, but firm. I think Marianne has made herself perfectly clear. It was the final blow. The patriarch, the silent judge, had just delivered his verdict, and it wasn't in favor of his own blood. He had chosen reason over loyalty. Truth over pretense. Veronica's face crumbled. In seconds, she seemed to age 10 years. She had been betrayed by her son, who hadn't defended the family's honor, and abandoned by her husband, who refused to fight a lost war. With clumsy, disjointed movements, she grabbed her designer purse, the ridiculous symbol of a status that no longer existed, and without even looking at me, walked past toward the front door. Mr. Bennett followed her, but paused in the doorway. He looked at me for a long moment, and then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't approval. It was an acknowledgement. Between equals. Then he left, closing the door with a soft, final click. The echo of that sound lingered in the air, marking the end of one act, and the uncertain, thrilling beginning of another. Only Leonard and I remained in the silent, echoing house. He hadn't moved. He stood there in the middle of the kitchen, shoulders slumped, staring blankly at the empty space his parents had just occupied. After a long, heavy while, he finally lifted his head. His eyes no longer held anger, but only a profound confusion, a deep, aching loss, and the dawning, bitter understanding of what had just happened. The war with his parents had ended in total surrender. But the one between us, that one had only just begun. And for the first time, in the chilling silence of my kitchen, I felt utterly ready for it. He remained there, motionless, turned to stone, a pathetic statue amidst the ruins of his own self-proclaimed kingdom. The silence his parents left behind was heavier than any screen could convey. I watched him for a few seconds, waiting for a reaction, a word, anything to break the agonizing stillness. Nothing. He finally slumped onto one of the stools at the island, the very same one where he'd delivered his ultimatum 2 nights earlier, and buried his face in his hands. There was no anger left in his posture, only the crushing weight of total, abject defeat. And in that instant, I felt no triumph. No satisfaction. What filled me instead was a deep, aching emptiness. The stark recognition that the man I had once loved no longer existed, if he ever truly had. Before me wasn't a husband, but a stranger, sitting in my kitchen, mourning not the loss of his partner, but the complete collapse of his audience. That night, we didn't speak a single word. I took my pillow and a blanket and quietly settled into the guest room, the same one I used as my office. Closing that door felt more final than any argument we'd ever had. It was a physical wall, perfectly symbolizing the impenetrable emotional barrier he had spent years building between us. The next morning, when I came downstairs, he was already gone for work. On the gleaming quartz countertop lay a note, scrawled in his rushed handwriting. "We need to talk." I didn't read the rest. I crumpled the paper, a satisfying crunch, and tossed it into the trash. We had talked enough. Now, it was time to act. I spent the day on the phone, contacting attorney Julia Harper, a sharp lawyer specializing in real estate and divorce cases, highly recommended by one of my clients. The conversation was clear, direct, and surprisingly, exhilaratingly liberating. For the first time in a very long time, I was planning for my future, not ours. A week later, I met Leonard, not in our house, but in the sterile, neutral setting of a coffee shop. I handed him a slim folder. Inside, neatly organized, were copies of the property deed, bank statements clearly showing the transfer of my inheritance money for the down payment, and a meticulously detailed proposal for asset division. Everything was laid out in clean, precise spreadsheets, just as meticulous as the invoice I had once shown his mother. I watched as he read. His face slowly turned pale, then ashen. In those cold, black and white numbers, the entire fiction that he had been the sole provider completely collapsed. Every single figure was a mirror, reflecting a brutal truth he could no longer deny. "Marianne, please," he whispered, looking up, his eyes pleading. "We can fix this. I promise I'll change. I'll set boundaries with my mother. I'll do anything." His promises sounded hollow. Empty echoes from a past that no longer had any place in my life. The relationship with his parents disintegrated in the most predictable way possible. Veronica tried calling me a dozen times the next day, alternating between furious voicemails and sickeningly falsely conciliatory messages. I didn't answer a single one. I blocked her number. And Mr. Bennett's too. A few days later, I received a brief, formal email from him. "We regret what happened on Sunday. Leonard has explained the financial side. We hope you can resolve your matters in the best way possible." It wasn't an apology. It was a strategic withdrawal. They knew they had lost their access, their influence, their privileges. They were cutting their losses. I never heard from them again. And their absence felt like opening a window after years of breathing stale, stagnant air. The fate of the house, that supposed nest of love that had slowly become my gilded cage, was resolved with the same cold efficiency as everything else. On my lawyer's advice, I gave Leonard two options. He could buy out my share of the property, which would mean securing a mortgage for nearly 80% of its current market value, or we could sell and split the profit according to our documented contributions. Of course, he couldn't afford the first option. His salary, though decent, simply wasn't enough to sustain the illusion of luxury he loved to project without my capital. Reluctantly, he agreed to sell. Watching him sign the papers in front of Mr. Robert Thompson, the realtor, was the true, quiet end of our marriage. There were no tears. No shouting. Only the crisp sound of a pen, signing the close of a story. 2 weeks later, while I was in a client meeting, he moved out. When I returned, half the closets were empty. His personal things were gone. On the countertop, he'd left his keys and a note. "I'm sorry." I never knew what he was truly sorry for. Humiliating me? Destroying our marriage? Or simply for being caught? Through a mutual friend, I later heard he'd moved into a small, functional, charmless, cramped apartment near his office. His comfortable life was over, yes, but not at my expense. It had collapsed under its own unbearable weight. He wanted separate budgets, and in the end, he got a separate life. The house sold quickly in New York City's competitive market. On closing day, I received a wire transfer large enough to guarantee not just security, but absolute, undeniable freedom. With part of that money, I rented a beautiful loft in Soho, exposed brick walls, huge windows, and warm, golden light flooding my new space. Above the door, my new name, Mary Ann Carter Design Studio. The rest, I invested, following Grandma Teresa's timeless advice: build your independence, not someone else's. My business began to thrive. Without Sunday lunches. Without the constant, suffocating pressure to seek approval that never came. My creativity soared. I landed major clients, ambitious, fulfilling projects. What had once been merely my hobby became a solid, successful company. Now, when I sit in my studio with my tablet on my lap, I sometimes think about that white quartz kitchen. Not with bitterness, but with quiet gratitude. It was the stage of my greatest humiliation, yes, but also, undeniably, the launchpad of my liberation. These days, I cook only for pure pleasure. I invite friends who genuinely enjoy my food and fill my home with laughter instead of criticism. Leonard, Veronica, and Mr. Bennett are just characters in a distant story. Shadows of another life. I wish them no harm. I simply wish them nothing at all. They occupy zero space in my present. Friday nights are no longer something I dread, they're something I celebrate. Sometimes, I order my favorite takeout. Other times, I open a bottle of good wine and work late on a project I'm passionate about, simply because I want to. I look around at this space that is entirely, unequivocally mine, built with my work, my effort. And I finally understand what true wealth means. It's not in a huge house or a lavish 3-course dinner. It's in the quiet, profound peace of living by your own rules. My name no longer appears on makeshift labels inside a refrigerator. It's engraved on my studio door, on my invoices, on my project contracts, and on the unbreakable contract of my own happiness. That, my friends, is a value no one can ever measure, or ever take away. If I learned anything from this whirlwind, it's this: your worth is not an opinion others get to debate. It's not measured by a husband's approval, a mother-in-law's praise, or anyone else's validation. It's a fact. For years, I allowed their distorted perception of me to define my own. I let their blindness make me disappear. Their constant criticism convinced me I wasn't enough. I used to think that if I just tried harder, cooked better, kept the house spotless, they would finally see my worth. But the problem was never my effort. The problem was their profound inability to recognize it. The greatest lesson wasn't about teaching them my value. It was about powerfully, defiantly reminding myself of it. The irony is, Leonard was right about one thing. It was time to end the comfortable life at someone else's expense. He just picked the wrong person. Because the comfortable life was his, built on my inheritance, sustained by my invisible labor, and decorated with my emotional energy. He and his parents had been enjoying the benefits of a partnership where only one partner paid the full price. My story, I know, isn't unique. Millions of women around the world are silent partners in their own lives, contributing invisible capital, time, energy, love, organization, assets that never appear on any balance sheet. Yet, without them, everything would simply collapse. That invoice I showed on my tablet was never really about $350. It was a statement of principles. A boundary I should have drawn long, long before. Putting a price on my work was never about getting rich. It was my urgent way of making it excruciatingly clear that what I do isn't free. Sometimes, the only way to make people truly understand the value of what you do is to show them the devastating cost of not having it. Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're vital lines we draw to protect ourselves, to teach the world how we deserve to be treated. And the hardest, most vital lesson of all is this: you are the one who must hold that pencil. No one else will draw the line for you. True strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it reveals itself in the quiet certainty of a firm, unwavering decision. My power didn't come from conflict. It was born in the deep, chilling calm of that Friday night, when his humiliation met not my tears, but my defiant smile. We live in a society that too often teaches women to defend themselves through raw emotion, to cry, to beg, to over-explain. But there is immense, undeniable power and irrefutable logic in serenity. In using the very tools of the system that tries to hold you down to meticulously set yourself free. My tablet, that little drawing toy he once mocked, became my sharpest sword. My knowledge of home management and finances became my impenetrable shield. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply presented the facts. And facts, unlike opinions, are not up for debate. So, if you're listening to my story and have ever felt invisible, underestimated, or completely taken for granted, I want you to know something profoundly important. Your work. Your effort. Your time. It all matters, even if no one else is keeping count. Don't wait for humiliation to spark the realization of your value. Start today. Make a mental list of everything you contribute, every task, every detail you keep running smoothly, without recognition. Be your own accountant. Acknowledge your invisible capital. Because the first step toward earning others' respect is fiercely respecting yourself, with a conviction that doesn't break for anyone. Your peace, your dignity, and your energy are priceless, and you don't need anyone's permission to claim them. My story found its ending, one that I wrote, produced, and financed myself. But I know there are thousands like mine still being written, stories unfolding every single day in kitchens, offices, and living rooms across the world. Mine ended with the sale of a house. But in truth, it began with the purchase of my freedom. And that, my friends, is an investment that never, ever loses its value. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it's entirely mine. And that ownership, the profound ownership of my independence, is the only one that truly matters. So, I have to ask you, have you ever had to put a literal price on your peace, just to make someone finally understand your worth? If my story about turning a kitchen into a boardroom and an invoice into a declaration of independence resonated with you, please, leave a comment below and tell me your experience. I really want to hear from you. And if, like me, you believe that every woman deserves for her value to be recognized and never discounted, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can make sure that more stories of women who stopped serving dinner and started serving justice are finally heard. Thank you for watching. Take care. And good luck.